listen, thank you so much for joining me. I know like these impromptu like chat sessions are just some of my favorite things lately about travel, just because the the interesting people I get to work with and meet and experience events with is just fantastic. And having these conversations in person versus like trying to do these remote things online just changes the dynamic.
It's totally different.
Completely.
Yeah.
Welcome everybody. This is Maker That Money, the podcast where we're talking about turning your hobby into your jobby. I am Pooch, your host, and I'm with a very special guest today, Mr. Scotty Allen, known as the I guess Mr. Strange Parts. You're known from being a very prolific YouTuber doing factory tours in China. But let me let you tell the people kind of like the origin story, if you would.
Well, the origin story. How long a story do you want?
Yeah.
How far back should I go?
It's your world, man. I think the idea is, we're trying to help inspire other makers ultimately that are looking to make a living out of their hobby in multiple ways. It doesn't have to be just about product. Yeah. A lot of it is, we talk to a lot of creators, and speakers and writers and all sorts of stuff. So, but that's the idea. So, but I think it's important for people to have a sense of, what you're at. So I'll let you dictate with your comfort level on the story.
I'll start way back and hopefully go quickly. I originally thought I was going to be a lighting designer for theater. That was my passion in high school.
Theater nerd. Okay.
Yeah,
all right.
I was a theater nerd.
Okay.
And thought I wanted to do that. I escaped high school early. Didn't graduate high school, escaped, and went to a small college called Simon's Rock in Western Massachusetts.
Okay.
Which has dirt roads and about 350 students at the time. And most students go after 2 years of high school and then do 2 years at Simon's Rock, get an associate's degree, and then transfer somewhere else to a normal college or university and do 2 more years and then get their bachelor's.
So at this point, you're just trying to get your GED, and this was an extension or beyond high school.
Not a GED.
It's not a GED.
No.
It's completing your high school though. This is not.
No. I never completed high school. No, it's just you just go straight to college, do 2 years of high school.
Okay.
And then go straight into college. And then you can either do 2 or 4 years at Simon's Rock. If you do 4 years, you get a full bachelor's. If you do 2 years, you get an associate's. And then all of those credits transfer to it's a fully accredited institution.
I've never heard of this. So it was common, though, for people to come in with only 2 years of high school, you're saying?
Yeah, I came in with more than that. I came in partway through my senior year.
Wow, okay.
So I was very involved in theater there, basically ran the theater by the time I was leaving.
Of course you did.
On the technical side.
Yeah.
And did a summer internship and absolutely hated it. They treated their interns like crap. I was working for room and board. It was super dangerous. Terrible experience.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so I went, maybe I don't want to do that. Through a random set of events, ended up as an intern at a startup in New York at 50 Wall Street or 50 Broadway, which is right in front of the Bull statue down in Wall Street.
Oh, wow, yeah.
In '99, they were doing artificial intelligence. They were trying to create the first true artificial intelligence.
In '99?
In '99.
Wow.
It was ahead of its time.
Sure.
And started as a system administrator. Ended up leaving there to go be a system administrator for a buddy that I went to college with. This is during the dot-com boom, so it was kind of, I was like, we were all kind of 19, 20, and you could kind of write your own ticket at that point. If you were smart and hungry and could learn on your own, you could do whatever you wanted. We ended up, 3 of us who were all under 21, ran a nationwide network of like 450 locations with T1s and all this stuff. So
wow.
Immediately got my hands into serious system and networking, and then through that found programming and absolutely fell in love with programming. And ended up traveling. That's kind of where my love for Asia started. I was making more money than a 20-year-old should at the time, compared to my ability to actually spend it. So I had saved up a lot of money. So I went and traveled I took all that savings and went and traveled in Asia for 16 months.
Okay.
All over Southeast Asia, Australia. Fell in love with Asia. But I also discovered that programming was really my passion. And so I went back and got my computer science degree, did another 3 years, got my computer science degree in Boulder. Got hired straight into Google out of there.
Okay.
Worked as a software engineer at Google for a couple years on web search, and then ended up going and working at a couple Silicon Valley startups. Kept getting smaller and smaller earlier stage until I started my own. So I started App Monster in, I think, 2010.
Did you say App Monster?
Monster with an A. Yep.
Okay, all right.
We were doing large-scale crawling and big data analysis on the app stores, which were really hot at the time.
Yeah.
So we had customers like Samsung and T-Mobile and people like that, where we were basically selling them an API feed of the contents of the app store every day that was fresh.
Wow.
Right? We were basically building the API that Google Play and iTunes didn't have, and sold that business in 2020, right before the start of the pandemic. Perfect timing.
Wow.
Was never huge. It was never really a startup in the sense of like funded or anything like that. It was bootstrapped.
This was all bootstrapped?
All bootstrapped.
Was it just you and a partner?
It was me.
A group?
It was me, and then I brought in a partner after, I don't know, like 6 months or a year. He was with me for about a year. He was more on the business side, but it wasn't quite the right fit. So I went back to being a solo founder after that. He retained a small stake.
You gloss over like that. That's not a big deal, but I've gone down, or I've heard horror stories around this. Like that it wasn't a good fit, and you both were pretty amicable about that, or it took a little time to kind of divest.
It took some time. Like we're amicable now. I think it took some time to sort of work through that.
Interesting.
What I will say is, and this is probably helpful to people listening, is I was really clear on having a founder's agreement from the start, and being really clear about founder vesting and things like that.
Sure.
So from a like comp perspective and stuff, it was pretty clear cut. Yeah. We did have to work out some like misunderstandings of what he had signed, what it meant. Because I was more familiar with the startup world than he was.
So there was more, I'll sign whatever you want. And then it was, I didn't
quite understand what that meant. He had read it, but I think there was some misunderstanding of like how it would work in the current circumstances.
So
but
did lawyers have to get involved, or was it?
We had a lawyer that drafted documents, but we didn't get to the point of like lawyers on both sides or anything. And really how it ended up working out was that he had vested. He worked for 13 months, I think, and he had just vested that amount of equity in the company, and I didn't have the cash to buy him out, and so he just continued to be a silent partner in the business.
Okay.
And I think at the time, like, he might have preferred a different outcome, but in the end, like, I mean, we just paid out because it was a bootstrap business. We just paid out profit over time, and I think it like. I get the impression he's very happy now. Like, and then when it got acquired, he got a piece of that. So
it worked out.
It worked out great.
It sounds like it worked out.
I think he felt taken care of. I felt good about it. And then I brought up the first person that I hired as a programmer. I hired. He lives in Slovenia, Luka, and I hired him when he was partway through a CS degree as an undergrad.
Okay.
And he was with me for pretty much the entire lifetime of the company. And in 2015, I decided, you know what, I'm really not enjoying running this company anymore. Like a lot of founders, I found myself in a place where the team had grown enough that it no longer made sense for me to be a technical founder. I was really spending all of my time on sales, which is like, it's the inevitable path for all founders. If you stay in the business, you're going to be a salesperson at the end of the day.
Well, but who's better equipped to sell than like the person that it's their baby, they know it the best. Okay, so you went from a theater nerd to a tech bro. Yep. And I heard like a little bit about your love of Asia, in there, but I assume we're coming back to that now.
We are. Okay. So 2015, I said, you know what, I really hate doing enterprise sales.
Yeah.
Our sales cycles were like 9 months. With
okay.
Big, Fortune 100s.
Sure.
Which was miserable. Or I hated it. I think it takes a certain DNA to really like that type of sales, which is not mine. And so I kind of hit my breaking point. I said, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to not do it anymore, including shutting the company down.
Yeah.
So I went to Luca and I said, Luca, do you have any interest in running the company? And Luca had matured a lot as a developer and as a person and a leader at that point. He was a technical leader at the company at that point. And he said, yeah, I'll give it a go. And,
Wow.
and so he stepped into a COO role and a salesperson role, which we were always a fairly technical company. So we had hired various salespeople at times, but they never sold as well as the engineers did, as well as I did or Luca did.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay.
And we had this interesting advantage, which is like, if you have an engineer doing the sales, you never in a position where a customer asks you a technical question or a nuanced question and you can't answer it immediately.
Yeah.
You're never like, oh, I have to go ask an engineer.
Which has to instill a level of confidence in your, buyer that's great.
Yeah. And so you have this level of credibility.
For sure.
Kind of, by the first or second meeting.
Yeah.
They know that you know what you're talking about and you can move relatively quickly on that side of things. And then it's just really a matter of like navigating the corporate hierarchy kind of thing and working out budgets and price points and stuff.
Okay. So Luca
took over, and I had started the company in 2010 with the goal of going nomadic. I had read 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, which I actually have a signed copy. I didn't
really
realize.
You've met Tim Ferriss?
No,
you just got a signed copy.
I got a signed copy in a bookstore in Mountain View, California.
Yes.
That I had found this book on the shelf while I was wandering through the bookstore and went, this looks interesting.
I mean, it does feel like it falls in the realm of entrepreneurial canon at this point. Like everybody's heard of 4-Hour Workweek.
Yeah.
And read it.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know if everybody's read it. I've read it. Yes. I'm familiar with the concepts. Yes.
Definitely like sparked a fire in me of like, okay, I want to do this. And so 2015 was kind of that moment where I was like, okay, I'm going to do it. I also had an unfortunate but serendipitous apartment fire, which if you're ever looking to like get rid of a lot of stuff, I can highly recommend a small apartment fire. The goal is to not have it burn your stuff, but just have a lot of smoke damage so that now, because the problem is when you move, the easiest thing to do is to put stuff in boxes.
Right.
Because it requires zero decision.
Right. This box. Good.
But if you have an apartment fire and everything gets smoke all over it, now cleaning it is more work than hanging on to it.
You're like, how much do I really want this?
Yeah. And the answer is for a lot of things, if it involves some level of effort to keep it, you'll just get rid of it.
I can share an interesting, just aside, just to cut in really quick, but I live in the Sierra Nevada foothills in California, so we're in a high fire danger area. And for the first time ever, like last summer, this was 2 summers ago now, we had a wildfire that was close enough where they gave us an evacuation order. And it's kind of jarring when you get that, like, evacuate immediately. Yeah. And so I, like, run into the house, and I start looking through stuff, and I'm like, okay, what do I need? I'm like, I don't need any of this. And it was an interesting exercise. Yes, so you've experienced similar. Now, thankfully, nothing ended up happening, and I didn't, maybe not thankfully, because I could always stand to purge a little bit more, but anyway.
And I didn't really lose anything. Like, I lost a couch and some things. Okay. But most of it was just a question of like weeding through all my stuff, figuring out what I wanted to keep and what I didn't want to keep. Put everything in storage and started traveling. Went back to Asia. I'd been back to Asia since my big trip here and there, but I went back for considerable lengths of time at that point.
Okay.
Was nomadic for a couple of years, and then was kind of looking for my next adventure. Right, like I took like a year off and just kind of was a bum and hung out with cool people and did cool stuff but I was like, I hadn't sold the company at this point. The company's just running in the background, and I'm getting, I'm basically able to cover my expenses. Yeah. But Luca's running the company, right? Okay. So I'm spending a day a month, right? Like I have one phone call a month with Luca, and I'm like doing all the bookkeeping and accounting and paying bills.
Seems pretty nice.
Which is a pretty sweet spot. But I also knew that like we had a very small market. And like very small total addressable market, and we're reliant on a small handful of customers, and like this wasn't going to last forever. Okay. Right. So I'm like, okay, what? And I wasn't, putting tons of money away, right? Like it was supporting my lifestyle, but it wasn't, a big cash cow. Okay. So I was thinking, okay, what's my next adventure here? And I decided that. Well, I didn't want to go back into enterprise sales. I was thinking, well, maybe I'll go into some sort of physical product, right? And so IoT is hot at the time. This is like 2015, 2016. IoT fits my skill set pretty well, right? I'm a pretty good software engineer, and electronics had always been a hobby ever since I was a little kid. So I was like, okay, well, that sounds interesting. Then I'd heard about Shenzhen well, if you want to make electronics, Shenzhen is the place to go.
It's the place to be. Okay.
So I had in my head of like, well, maybe I'll go to Shenzhen and hang out there for a month or two and like prototype some stuff. And then my friend Mitch Altman, do you know Mitch?
No.
So Mitch is often described by other people as the Johnny Appleseed of hackerspaces.
Okay.
He started NoiseBridge in San Francisco.
Okay.
He's one of the 2 co-founders of that. But he has spent a lot of his life just traveling around the world, teaching people to solder in soldering workshops, and encouraging people to start hackerspaces. And he's probably responsible for, I would say, at least hundreds of hackerspaces getting started, but probably thousands.
Wow, that many? Are you serious? Yeah. So everywhere Mitch goes, he just leaves a
trail of
hackerspaces. That is a claim to fame. I would love to meet him someday.
He's amazing.
Okay.
He's amazing. He currently lives in Berlin.
Okay.
And he, for a number of years, was doing a hacker trip to China. So he would invite people. His product, which supported him for many years, and I think he's still making it and still making money on it, is the TVB gun. So it is a keychain-sized device that it literally fits on your keychain. That is a television remote, a universal television remote with one button. And the button just turns the TV off.
So it's that obnoxious thing. So if you're at the bar, you can just be like, I'm going to shut that TV off.
Yeah.
Shut that TV off.
Yeah, because he hates TVs, and it turns out many other people do too.
And he takes his aggressions out on all of them everywhere he goes.
Yeah, well,
he enables people to do that.
Have you ever been in the airport lounge?
Yeah,
and it's 2 a.m. and there's Fox News blaring or CNN blaring.
And there's no remote to be
found. Nobody wants it on. Everybody hates it, right?
Yeah.
I carry it when I go traveling for those particular.
What a great product. Okay.
It's a perfect product, and it's he's the perfect salesperson for it. And he's sold many, many, many of them. And he has worked with a Chinese manufacturer to produce these for many, many years.
Yeah.
And so he goes back and visits them every year. And he started this hacker trip to China to have people join him, other hackers join him on his trip to China. And that turned into this 3-week trip of usually going to 3 or 4 different cities and visiting various hackerspaces and makerspaces in China. Everybody on the trip kind of is doing something interesting, and they give a talk about what they're doing. Mitch gives a talk about why you should start hackerspaces. So that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. And I said, okay, I'll go with Mitch, because Mitch, China's a bit intimidating in that there's very little English spoken. It's a hard place to travel, right? So it was it was easier to go with someone and go with a group who was already going and kind of get a lay of the land. So I went with him, and we flew into Hong Kong and had a couple days there. And I had traveled pretty extensively in Asia at this point, but I had not been to Hong Kong or mainland China at that point. And I remember having this experience where I walked into I had previously been in Scotland, and I brought a nice bottle of scotch with me.
Okay.
And I walked into a 7-Eleven to get some paper cups because we were all going to hang out. And
that's what you drink, a nice bottle of scotch out of.
Yeah, exactly.
7-Eleven paper
Exactly.
cups. Perfect. Yeah. He's a classic guy.
Yeah. And I asked for 6 cups, and she said, "Oh," and I went, "Hang loose."
She threw the shock at you. Okay.
It turns out this is the Chinese hand sign for 6.
6. Oh, so this is
5.
6. Okay.
This is 6.
Oh, damn.
Yeah.
Okay.
7.
Sure. Why not?
8.
But
9.
Is it sign language, or it's just this is common?
Not formally ASL or something. Anybody on the street would know all of these hand signs.
Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
And then this is 10, which actually looks like the character for 10.
Yeah. Or Roman numeral. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, oh, I'm not in Kansas anymore. This is a different, I think I know what I'm doing, but I'm out of my element here. So
all right,
we crossed the next day into Shenzhen, and now I'm really out of my element, but I'm immediately in love. It breaks all of the stereotypes I had about China, that, right? This is a city of 17 million people.
Yeah.
There's giant skyscrapers. There's brand new subways. this is not the third world country I thought I was visiting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we, first or second day, we go to the electronics markets where there's just like blocks and blocks and blocks of like, 6-story tall, like big marketplaces with all these little, little booths with vendors selling switches and wires and buttons and, all this cool stuff.
Wow.
And immediately fell in love. So I continued with the rest of the trip. And then when we were done in Beijing, I didn't have an onward flight yet, so I immediately took a train back to Shenzhen and spent like another month there. Fell in with a group of open source hardware hackers, loosely led by Ian from Dangerous Prototypes, which I don't know if you know.
No.
He is the creator of the infamous Bus Pirate, which I think I explained to you the other day when we were talking. It's basically like a development board that allows you to have a command line interface to things like I2C and SPI and things like that. Basically gives you a command line interface to chips. And he had done some hacker, what he called hacker camp. So he had people come for 3 days to Shenzhen, and he would sort of give them a lay of the land. So they would do 1 day of one day of talks, 1 day of factory tours, and 1 day of market tours.
Yeah.
And then kind of turn people loose. Well, it turns out like people don't want to fly halfway around the world for 3 days, so they would just stay on, and everybody would meet up at Chinese barbecue every night.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is like, I'm getting to how I started Strange Parts. This is integral to the story.
Yeah.
But people would then stay for much longer. Like they fell in love with Shenzhen the way I did. So we were pretty much had this like perpetual group of people at barbecue, and people would come and go. It was kind of this revolving door of people.
Yeah.
But there was always a group going to barbecue pretty much every night to drink beer and eat barbecue. And everybody would bring whatever they'd found at the market that day, whatever they were working on. Some people were doing manufacturing, so they'd be at the factory during the day, and they'd bring all their war stories from the factory.
Wow.
And I was just getting this master's level education in manufacturing.
I mean, you're describing what sounds like an open air incubator, like on
incredible.
That's insane. I've never even heard of anything like this. This
like
is great.
Very fertile environment for the right type of person.
Like in the heart of it, like in the heart of where like all of this is happening.
3 blocks from the markets.
Yeah.
Right. Like we're at the barbecue place that everybody who's selling cell phones during the day is drinking at.
Yeah.
Right. And so, I mean, like Ian had made tons of market contacts just sitting there drinking beer, like prior to doing Hacker Camp or anything
You're
like that.
Networking, you're solving problems.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Okay.
Yeah. And so I hung up with them for a while, and I was just spending more and more time in China. I was like coming and going, and it got to the point where, well, I don't know. I think at that point I was still coming and going, but I was spending more time in China than I was anywhere else. Mm-hmm. And kind of trying to figure out what I wanted to do, what product I wanted to make. It turns out China's not like a great place to come up with a product idea because you're isolated from your customer. You're far better doing your product ideation and development in the West, assuming you're going to sell to a Western market, which if you absolutely should be doing if you're a Westerner.
Yeah.
Right. Like for a variety of reasons.
Sure.
China's not a good market as a Westerner. And then one night at barbecue, we were sitting around, and someone from the British Council comes to dinner, and she was like, I was walking through the cell phone markets on my way to the main markets, and I think there are all these parts there. I think maybe you could make your own cell phone. Like I bought a few parts, and I think maybe you could make your own cell phone. And we didn't really know, we collectively as a group didn't really know much about the cell phone markets and viewed them as very opaque.
Yeah.
It was really hard to tell what was going on. All the parts looked the same. It really wasn't geared toward Westerners at all, right? Mm-hmm. The main markets were starting to sort of clue in that Westerners had money, and like you'd get a lot of attention there, but in the cell phone markets, not much. There's nothing in English. It was like hard to figure out. And so I was like, that's a really good idea. And then she went back to Britain, like didn't really hear anything more about it. And 9 months later, sitting at the same barbecue place, there was a reporter there from Popular Mechanics who was doing a story about our group at barbecue.
Yeah.
And I said, I've had this idea bouncing around in my head ever since she mentioned this, about building my own cell phone from parts that I bought in the markets. Like, do you think your audience would be interested in that? Like, I was thinking maybe I'd make a video or something. And he was like, yes, you should absolutely do that. And I will definitely write an article. Like, please send it to me. And I was like, that was enough validation to go, okay, this is worth spending time on. And I spent a little, I started to dig into it. And I was like, okay, there seems to be more iPhone parts in the market. And iPhone is definitely more like recognizable brand. It's not really seen as DIY in the way that like Android is. I'll go down the iPhone route. And like, I started to dig into this, and I started to shoot it as, I thought it was going to be like an episodic thing.
Yeah.
But the more I got into it, the more I realized that this rabbit hole was really deep. Like, I was just learning all sorts of crazy things about the markets, right? And just, story after story after story, and was filming on my cell phone mostly, and was spending all my time sort of digging into the markets and none of my time editing because I didn't really know I hadn't really made video at that point. I'd taken, a video editing class in college and stuff, and I had the theater background.
Sure.
But I didn't have any real serious video production experience. So got to the end, like, I think I spent 2 to 3 months figuring out this journey, right? This rabbit hole. Do I try and make my own logic board? That seemed too difficult. I ended up meeting one of the top cell phone repair teachers in the world.
That's interesting.
From Geelong cell phone repair school up in Guangzhou. Went up and visited him, and he said, maybe it's possible. I wouldn't spend my time doing it. Like, it's not worth it. So ended up building an iPhone 6S that worked, and was like,
I wouldn't do it, and you're like, challenge accepted.
Yeah,
I immediately dismissed that.
Yeah, I thought about it. I poked at it a little bit, and I went, yeah, I don't think this is a future project.
Okay.
And because there are so many components on these boards.
Yeah.
And how do you know if you have a single one wrong?
And
right.
More and more every iteration of them too. Yeah.
Well, they've consolidated some, but the boards have gotten more complicated because now they're a sandwiched board. So they're actually 2 circuit boards that's held together by a ring of tiny connections on this weird spacer in between. Mm-hmm. So it's actually quite difficult to make repairs to a board now. You have to split them apart, and then once you've split them apart, you can't test it. So the repair markets have all sorts of crazy jigs to like get around this, but it's gotten harder.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
But there are potentially fewer components now. So yeah, after like 2 or 3 months, made a working phone, and by this point, I had been going to barbecue every night, right? So I'm going to barbecue, and I'm telling these guys what I'm finding in the markets. Right?
Now, was this called? It was called barbecue. Like, you didn't have a name for this. Like, everybody was just like, "We're going to barbecue."
No, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and we migrated barbecue places at one point. Like,
so it was not even at the same place.
It was within a block of each other.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. At one point, I think we migrated to a place we called Car Wash because it was like in the same alley as a car wash.
Yeah, okay.
So it's been a couple different places, but it's all within the same kind of 2-block radius.
Yeah.
Same group of people. It's just a WeChat group, basically.
Yeah.
I think the WeChat group is called like HQB Friends, Huashan Bay Friends.
Wow.
And so I'm going to barbecue every night, and I'm telling them what I found, and they're fascinated. And what I realized later, fairly recently, like the past year or two, is that it was kind of the equivalent of how stand-up comedians work on their material.
Sure, yeah.
I'm literally going and working out my story in front of new people every night because this is a rotating cast of characters, right?
Absolutely.
And so I'm constantly getting new people who are all kind of the same demographic,
well,
right?
and are these all nomadic people? So people are coming and going because like that's just the nature.
They're
of
not
what
necessarily
it is,
full nomads. There'll be people who, have a full-time job and house and stuff, but they're coming for 3 weeks.
Okay.
Kind of thing.
Okay.
Some nomads like me, other people coming there for manufacturing, like it's,
Interesting.
a wide range.
All right.
But all sort of like
You're working on your material.
working on my material, working on the story, bringing parts, this kind of thing. And by the time I've got a working phone, this is a pretty compelling story. Like, people are pretty blown away by what I'm, and the way I'm telling it and stuff. So then I finished that like right before Spring Festival, I think. something like that. And then I go down to Bali for Spring Festival because you don't want to stay in China during Spring Festival, particularly in Shenzhen.
It's a madhouse, like it just
It's a madhouse, and then everybody leaves, right? So
madhouse to ghost town.
yeah.
Wow.
So 17 million.
Yeah.
85% leave during Spring Festival for a period of 2 to 3 weeks.
Where do they go?
All back to their hometowns. Nobody's
Okay.
from Shenzhen.
Yeah.
Right. So they all go back home, and nothing is open. There are no taxi cabs. There are no grocery stores that are open. No restaurants that are open. It's just like apocalypse level.
Literally a ghost town. Like that's
it's like everybody gets raptured.
It's just such a swing. That's wild.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can like barely subsist. Ian has stayed there through Spring Festival. I never have.
I feel like you could like go and camp out. Like there could be a whole thing. But anyway,
he said you could just walk down some of the major roads, like right down the middle of them. You know, that
that's
are like
wild. Okay.
You know,
okay.
4 lanes per side.
Sure.
You know, kind of thing. Big boulevards, and there's just no cars. Right. Yeah. You just do whatever you want.
Cool. All right.
So I went to Bali and started working on the edit. Right. Of like, and by this point, I don't know. By the time I was done, I had 100 hours of shot footage. Right. And so I'm just
where
like,
are we in time here? What year is
like
this?
beginning of 2017.
Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
end of 2016, beginning of 2017. And so I start to dig into this footage, and I still think I'm making like an 8-episode thing.
Okay.
Right? That's going to go up on YouTube as kind of a vlog because I don't really know any better. And I had a friend recommend, well, why don't you make a trailer? Right, which is not how you make trailers.
Yeah.
Right? Like generally,
In time. You know, like you need like a good
generally
voiceover,
you do your trailer after the fact, right? Because you don't really
you've
know
got the footage. Then,
yeah, right. It's quite hard to like grab the snippets out of a pile of raw footage and make a trailer.
1 minute.
Yeah. So I end up what I end up trying to make as a trailer becomes this 23.5-minute video that is the story of me trying to make my own iPhone in China. And, you know, I kind of iterate on it. I come back and I show it to Ian. I show it to some other people. I ran it past Bunny Huang at one point to get his opinion on, like, how to treat people in the markets. Because I was shooting some stuff, like, kind of hidden camera style. And I wanted to make sure that I was being ethical in terms of whose face to show and who's not to show and stuff.
Okay.
And then I had met a couple other reporters at that point who were all very keen on the story. And so, you know, I put together a big launch, spent 2 weeks coming up with the name Strange Parts.
And that was my next question. So it took you 2 weeks to come up with a name.
Post-it notes all over the apartment, just
and
walls
like
of Post-it
what
notes.
was the epiphany?
There was no epiphany.
Oh man,
Yeah.
I thought
No, there was no
Post-it notes
epiphany.
everywhere, and I thought there was
No.
like a the
was-
string is connected to all the things, like a whole
No.
Pepe Silva bit.
I had
no.
I originally wanted to go with Delve, but Delve there was other like the domain names weren't available and stuff. So so I went with Strange Parts.
I think you chose right there.
I'm very happy with the name. I wanted a brand that would last me 20 years, that I could do many things under. And so it couldn't be too specific.
Yeah, you can do a lot of stuff with that.
Yeah.
I like that. I
Yeah.
like that. Very cool. That is well, and I don't even know if we're at the end of it. But I was
Well,
gonna
kind
say,
of the punchline
hand
here
down.
is
Yeah.
then
Oh, yeah.
then I post this video.
Yeah.
I tried to do an exclusive story with a couple different news outlets. One nearly, I won't say which one, but one nearly stole the story successfully from me. They tried to send a television crew or a video crew to Shenzhen and reshoot the story.
Like with
so that
somebody
they would-
else?
Yeah. Well,
the
they started trying to do it with me, and then they approached Ian. Unfortunately, Ian's a very upstanding guy, and he was like, you know they're trying to screw you, right?
What the heck, man?
Yeah, it was really dirty. And it, like, knowing what I know now, I would have gone to their editorial board and been like, this is bullshit.
You're getting written out of your own
yeah.
movie. Oh, your own
It
story.
was
Okay.
really dirty.
Wow.
And it is,
This is a major publication?
this is
Or a
the,
major-
the top of the top. Yeah.
What?
Yeah. I'll tell you off.
Oh, man. Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Absolute tier 1 outlet.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I had offered them the exclusive on the story.
Okay, so you're shopping exclusive, so then these guys try to bone you on it, and then what happened?
Then tried to offer it to somebody else. They dropped it at the last moment. They said it was a conflict of interest because they had a reporter writing a book about the origin of iPhone parts. So I finally said, you know what? I'm just going to email. I had a handful of reporters that I had collected, like had researched. I'm just going to email them. I'm going to put the story out there, see what happens. So I put it up on YouTube, posted to Reddit, email these reporters, and then kind of nothing happens, right? Like it gets a few views. At this point, I was like pretty sure it had legs, right? I would have been happy if it had gotten like 50, 100,000 views, right? I thought that was like a serious, like serious but attainable goal.
Okay,
right?
all right.
Doesn't really do anything. And then somebody reposts it on Reddit. I was kind of early. Gets reposted to Reddit in the video subreddit, and it takes off. It's like climbing the ranks. All of a sudden, it's the top of videos. And then all of a sudden, it's on the front page.
Yeah.
And then it's at the top of the front page.
Yeah.
And then it just stays there.
Yeah.
And now the reporters start responding.
Of course. Yeah.
And so
of course.
I'm getting requests for interviews. I'm getting requests for television interviews.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happens is it's just going viral at this point, right? It's all over the place.
Yeah, it's a good story. Sure.
And it's taking off on YouTube, right? I've got friends emailing me that are like, "You're on the homepage of my TV. What the hell?" Yeah. Because when they open YouTube on their television, they're just getting my face.
And it's like, you're the thumbnail.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
But it also goes viral in China, which I was not at all prepared for. It goes viral on WeChat.
Wow. And what is that like?
It means I'm getting recognized on the street.
Yeah.
And I had not, that was not part of my thought process.
Yeah.
And there had been arrests in the markets the day before.
Okay.
Which is really poorly timed. So I'm very worried that I don't know what the reception is going to be.
They're going to think you're the narc.
And they think I'm the narc. Like, I'm the reason that people got arrested.
Oh, no.
And so I'm walking around with, like, a hoodie on and, like, it turned out to be fine. Like,
okay.
Turned
I was
out.
gonna say, I think you're a rather identifiable individual in the markets of Shenzhen, yes? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
So, totally wild ride, right? Like, I go from
What a
everybody just thinks, oh, it's some white dude, to, like, literally everybody in China knows who I am.
Yeah.
Overnight.
Yeah.
Right, like, overnight. And also in the West. And really the whole goal of doing this video and starting the YouTube channel and making video content was to have this be a marketing channel for the electronics that I'm going to build.
Sure.
But all of a sudden, this is too successful now. I'm like, okay, how am I gonna follow this up?
Yeah.
Right. So now I'm scrambling to do the next thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I guess I'm a full-time content creator, at least
really,
for the foreseeable future.
You really had lightning in a bottle, though.
Yeah.
You know, how do you get the sequel to even
Well, you add the headphone jack back to an iPhone.
Yeah, you do.
So that's what I did, and that hit. And then I was kind of off to the races.
Okay, so you really leaned into the iPhone content and stuff, but
yeah,
okay,
because I was immersed in that world. Like I'd been immersed in that world by the time I put out the video, it had been 5 months of full time work.
Yeah,
I had really like doubled down on that first iPhone video, and you don't spend 5 months in a world like that most other people don't know anything about.
Yeah,
without coming up with like 100 other ideas.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities to go back to that well. It sounds like.
Yeah, totally. So
that's great.
So immediately dealing with all of the challenges that most creators don't deal with for the first year or two. So I get my first copyright strike or copyright claim.
Okay.
Within the first couple weeks on a video that's gone viral.
Okay.
For a song that I have paid to license.
Well, that's obnoxious.
Yeah.
Okay. And
so navigate that.
At the time, was that a bit of a pain to deal with, or has the process gotten better?
The licensing company blackmailed me.
So they basically they know that they can hold your video hostage, which is definitely going to reduce your income pretty dramatically.
I wasn't having any income at that point.
Oh, there was no partner. You were no rev share.
It was the first video on my channel.
I guess so.
So I immediately qualified, but you still have to go through the approval process.
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm not running ads on it yet.
Okay.
So because they claimed it, they're running ads on it now.
What?
Which,
man, you've been dealing with some unsavory individuals.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So
it was a rocky start.
It sounds like it.
Because a lot of people you kind of get your feet wet and you sort of you figure these things out gradually.
Yeah.
I got to face them all at once.
You were just thrown right into the fire.
Yeah.
Okay, fine.
Yep.
So
So I navigate that. I got away for $600. Because I had paid, I forget what I paid. I paid, I don't know, $100, $50 to license the song from what's supposedly a legit licensing company.
And it was not legit. It was.
No, I mean, I know other people that license stuff through them. I don't like their business tactics. This is like
But why did you have to pay out then? If it was legit,
I'll tell you.
Okay, you're just a pragmatic individual, and you said, let's just settle this thing.
Yeah, well, I didn't have any other option, right? Like, they had me over a barrel.
Dislike.
A couple things. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's super dirty. A couple things. Because I had called the channel Strange Parts, but I was still a single individual, I had used their individual creator license or whatever.
All right.
They disagreed and thought that I should have a company or agency license.
Yeah.
Okay. But so the claim was not from them. It was from some other rights holder to this song, right?
Okay.
And I was like, So I went to them and I was like, take care of this. Like, I paid you to clear the rights on this. They came back and said, well, we don't agree that you have the right license. And I was like, okay. And they said, by the way, do you realize that all of our licenses don't allow monetization? You can't run ads on a video that includes this song. And I was like, what are you talking about?
What is the point of a royalty-free? Okay.
Exactly. They said, if you've read our terms of service, you'll note that in paragraph 12, it forbids monetization, which not mentioned anywhere in the checkout process for buying the license for this song. It is literally the terms of service of the website, like the little link down at the bottom.
But during the purchase, or they're trying to get you during the purchase, you had to check the box that said, I agree to the terms of service that nobody reads, or not even that?
I don't even know if it was that.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very opaque. And I said, no, like the channel isn't monetized yet, but I'm planning on monetizing it as soon as I can. And they said, well, you need a custom license. You need to talk to a salesperson. And meanwhile, the video's, still hugely viral, right? It's doing millions of views, right? I mean, the video's done 25 million views now. At the time, it probably had millions, right?
Yeah.
Single-digit millions. So now I'm in a discussion of like, okay, like how expensive is this going to be?
Yeah.
I got away for $600, but really dirty. Really dirty. So I'm learning a lot of hard lessons here along the way, right? But I know that I'm riding the dragon, right? Like this is,
you are.
I'm just strapped to the rocket and trying to not let go. You
really are, and I just don't even know to take the. I mean, this is hands down the best origin story I've ever dug in on in multiple fronts, because it's just like you've covered a lot of ground. It sets a great basis of discussion in terms of like your entrepreneurial experience and lessons learned, and we'll of course get to that stuff. But you're at square one here, and we see the basis, and you're obviously in to the extent where you're willing to pay blackmail to just like move on. Yeah. So that's that's fantastic. So it's not, but it is. But you've drunk the Kool-Aid at this point. You are a YouTuber.
I'm squarely in.
Okay, and you've learned a lot of quick and painful lessons.
Yes.
Okay, and so where did we go from here?
So then it was just a matter of like, okay, how do I keep replicating this, right?
Yeah.
And really, like, I would say like the short version of the next 6 or 7 years, really the theme is, how do I make this sustainable? Mm-hmm. And what everybody jumps to is money, right? When I talk about sustainable, and it's actually not what I've struggled the most with, right? Because like I was lucky enough to have a big audience right away, right? Like I hit 100,000 subscribers within those first couple of weeks, right? Like I immediately can be I've already been full-time on this for 5 months because AppMonts is supporting me, right? But I can continue being full-time on this and getting to the point where financially it's supporting me is not a problem.
Okay.
The issue is that I have spent 5 months on my first video of full-time work.
Yeah.
And 2 to 3 videos a year does not a YouTube channel make.
No, yeah. That's
right.
okay.
And like, I made some decent ad revenue on that first video, but again, like even if I was only making 2 or 3 videos a year, not really sustainable, right? Like, so now I'm in the position, and really like the past 7 years, I've been figuring out how do I put out content regularly without burning myself out, right? Like without working 12-hour days, 7 days a week.
And that is the million-dollar question.
Yeah,
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, and so really, it's been a matter of figuring out like. I've set the bar so high in terms of this like really ambitious engineering project. Yeah. Right. Both with that and then the headphone jack video. Yeah. How do I start producing content more often? How do I build a team? Like, how do I choose content that's maybe a bit more predictable in terms of schedule? Mm-hmm. How do I build up robust monetization so I'm not just reliant on YouTube ads because those ebb and flow? All of these things, right? And then how do I continue to foster this community? And then I think another big inflection point in that story, and we can get into more depth if you want, but another big inflection point, kind of 2 related ones, is like I come back so I start living in China full time, basically at this point. Like I start renting an apartment. Okay. I'm spending most of my year there. China's just like ripe for content, right? Like I literally walk out of my apartment and B-roll is just like waiting for me. Like just shooting like scooters driving down the street is interesting, right?
Yeah.
So like, okay. So like, and the markets are right there. Like I'm living walking distance from the markets, right? So they're super photogenic, and then there are just factories all over, right? So it's an easy place to make interesting content. Sure. But it's also a really difficult place to live and get everyday things done, right? Like,
and would you say especially as a Westerner?
Yeah. Yeah, especially as a non-Chinese speaker, right? Like that's the real barrier, is that I'm not fluent in Mandarin. I speak some, but I'm like survival level.
You've been learning, but then did you decide it was worth like having a handler, like hiring somebody to help with this?
So early on, I hired a Chinese cameraman who approached me, who said, like, within the first week or 2 after that first video came out, he was like, I'm a huge fan, I want to help you out. Okay. And so I started working with Jen Shu to film, like, factories and things like that, so he could translate when we were out doing that. Okay. I had people helping me with translation in the markets for more complex things. I've hired kind of fixer-level folks and translators at various times. And then December 19 comes around. I fly home for Christmas, and actually, like by this point, we're in talks to sell App Mazda, which ended up selling in February. So I spent a couple months in the U.S., and I'm starting to hear stuff on WeChat about this virus in Wuhan. They're locking down Wuhan, and like I had enough context at this point to know you don't lock down a city of 30 million people right before Chinese New Year unless something big is happening. And I'm supposed to, by this point, I'm like starting to think about like, how do I branch outside of just China, right? I've done a lot of content in mainland China. I want to start looking at like Vietnam. Tariffs are a big thing at this point. Stuff's being pushed into Vietnam. So I was going to go do a scouting trip for a couple weeks to Vietnam, see what was there in terms of the electronic scene, figure things out. And I go, I'm going to wait on that trip. Like, I'm still working on this App Monster deal. I'm going to hold off, just see what happens with this virus. And then, COVID starts, right? And so can't go back to China, right? China's closed, right? And so now I'm like, well, and I can't go to Vietnam. I can't do all of this other stuff. So now I'm like, crap, what content do I make? And I kind of hit this lull where I'm like, all of the content I'm making is not really viable right now. What the hell do I make? And start trying to like build up a workshop and do more studio-based stuff. That's kind of rough. And then I get a concussion, and so that takes me out for like a year plus. And so really now I'm kind of in that rebuilding phase of like having had a very quiet channel for a couple years, now rebuilding and getting back to making regular content.
So prior to the concussion, how many videos did you have at that point? Roughly.
Like, I want to say like between 60 and 70 probably, somewhere in that range. Yeah. And now I'm thinking...
And the channel had been running for a few years.
Like 4 years maybe, something like that, 3 or 4 years.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you feel like you went through a little hibernation. So this is interesting as we're telling the seasons of this. But before we get to that, let's jump back a second because, obviously people are going to listen to this as aspiring creators and whatnot, and they're going to be like, well, it's a really fascinating story, but this cannot be typical as far as people's journey into content creation, right? Like, we don't all have like lightning in a bottle or this like amazingly viral moment. It's a long, slow burn for a lot of people, and the landscape is certainly different now than it was, a decade ago, or I mean, arguably in a lot of times. So, let's dive in on some of this. There's a lot of tasty morsels here in the sense of, like, to tie it back to entrepreneurship. You pull from a rich history of work experience and all that stuff. You've had a bootstrapped business that you've sold on your own. You're kind of thinking, I want to be an indiepreneur now. There's an entire, like, I was talking at lunch about this. There's like just entire sections of like Twitter and online talking about like solopreneur, indiepreneur, like, I'm going to go live in Thailand and I'm going to do a software as a service business. Usually it's like something like that, right? Which is cool because like it allows people to have this travel lifestyle, and they just like go somewhere where it's low expenses and it's kind of nice to be. And usually they're pretty young and they don't have like family that they're tethered to and stuff. So I hear kind of commonalities in your story or your wanderlust and all of this stuff. You've experienced all of these things. So but let's just focus on the content creator bit.
Sure.
Content creator hears all this and they say, well, this is great. It's a cool story, but like, what nugget am I taking away? How do we start to get into Scotty's advice in terms of like, how do I build my viral strange parts video?
I have a piece of advice that I think is contrary to most advice you hear.
Oh, I like that.
Which is, so I think a lot of people have been a lot of people who want to become content creators get coached on, you need to make a bunch of content and you need to make it regularly. So
consistency is key, as we always hear.
You need to be releasing a video a week. You need to be releasing a video a day. You need to be, whatever it is, right?
I mean, arguably, I'd say consistency is the key to success in most of the things in our life. I mean, business, at least, certainly,
Yes.
Like, you don't get to just like, do it, and then I don't do it, and maybe I'll,
Right.
Yeah, okay. So you're in. You have to show commitment to this.
I'm going to say that I don't think consistency is key.
Oh, okay. No, that's good. Yeah.
So,
don't let me put words in your mouth.
But it is certainly the common advice. And I think there's a place for consistency. We can get into that. If you're starting out, I don't think that releasing content consistently is the best thing you can do. The best thing you can do is make amazing content. Right.
Okay. So releasing content for the sake of releasing content is not,
and that's the pitfall that most people enter,
because they're like, I have to get content.
They're like, I have to get something out, so I may as well, and I only have a certain amount of time, so I may as well just release a mediocre thing.
I gotcha.
And then they do it again, and then they do it again, and then they do it again, and they're constantly releasing these kind of mediocre things that if they had spent more time on them and really invested, they would have an amazing piece of content. And I'll actually kind of steal a theme that Jimmy, Mr. Beast, uses a lot, which is that the return on investment for content is not linear. So putting 2x the effort into a piece of content does not yield 2x the results. It yields more than 2x the results, right? So I think was I in the right place at the right time with the right idea? Yes. And it wasn't my idea, right? But I think the fact that I invested 5 months into making this video very much has a lot to do with the amount of success that I saw from it. And like I've said, it's been both, I think, the key to that early, huge rocket ship launch of a channel, but also has been my Achilles heel in that I set the bar very high for myself.
You did.
Right. But I think that a lot of creators would be well served to... let me go back to the consistency piece.
Sure.
Consistency does play a part, which is every day I got up and worked on that video.
Okay.
And that's the consistency you need. You need to be constantly putting effort into it.
Consistency of effort. Putting in the work.
Yes. And I think that for more mature channels like mine now, consistency is really important, right? In terms of retaining the audience, building audience behavioral patterns where they're used to checking in on you regularly.
Yes.
But I think early on, the best thing you can do is be consistent about the effort that you're putting in, right? And continually putting in effort. I probably reshot most of that first video at least 3 times.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So a lot of that video, and I don't talk about this a lot, but a lot of that video, a lot of the pieces of like me walking to and from the markets and things like that was recorded 2 or 3 times.
Really?
Yeah.
Just, but I would say just more, just transitional pieces or not.
Yeah,
not,
and
not
kind of
signi-
explanatory and
Okay,
stuff.
okay,
Yeah. I probably shot it once in the actual moment, and then I like reshot it. Sometimes it was like a technical issue, like I needed better audio. I got an audio recorder partway through it. I was shooting on an iPhone 6S and a little RX 100 point and shoot, and I eventually got a Zoom H1 to sort of clamp to the bottom to get better audio. But also it was a matter of like refining the storytelling. Like once I got into the edit, I figured out, like what I have is too long, or it doesn't explain the right thing, or it doesn't get me from this part in the story to that part in the story. It needs to be this instead. So I would go back out and pretend I was in the moment again, and kind of, it is acting in the sense that like I'm recreating what happened, but faithful to the journey, right? Like I'm not changing any facts about it. I'm just kind of recreating it to work well for the story.
It's storytelling. It's
yeah,
storytelling.
yeah,
I don't think anybody would fault you for that. Okay.
Yeah. I need to be careful about it though, because I did actually build an iPhone. I did actually put the headphone jack back in.
Sure.
But yeah, sometimes you need to reshoot stuff to work for a visual storytelling medium. And I think that's something that particularly beginning creators, like if you can shoot a video and edit it, come up with a rough edit and then watch it yourself first and go, like this could be tighter, right? Like this is a big thing is like, and now we're getting into the like nitty gritty of video, but one of the pieces of advice I ran across was come up with a rough edit and then cut it in half. And don't cut it in half by just like taking off the second half. Like cut the length in half by shortening. Like go through and find everything you can remove out of that video until you break the story, until the story no longer works at all, right? Like shave off. I mean, I was shaving off like half a second towards the end, right? Just so you cut it by half, and then you try and cut it in half again, and you keep doing it until you literally can't cut anything more. Right. And it's really this like distillation process where you're starting, because I started with 100 hours, right?
Oh wow, yeah, you
right. So I'm just boiling down. I didn't start with a 100-hour timeline, but like I mean, we've had videos where we're starting with a 5-hour timeline, right? Like we've shot 200 hours, and we're boiling it down and boiling it down, and just crunch and crunch and crunch and crunch and crunch, and you. Just like distillation, when you distill a liquid, right? When you distill alcohol, it gets more and more potent, right? Yeah. And so if you're dedicated to making sure the story still works, but shaving as much as you can, you end up with this really potent nugget of a story at the end. And in that process, if you are faithful to really being critical of yourself, and how can I make this story better, right? How can I get this scene, instead of a minute, to be 30 seconds? Now that it's 30 seconds, how do I get it down to 15 seconds? How do I get it from 3 sentences down to 1 sentence, right? Yeah. How do I get it from a sentence down to a phrase? Yeah. How do I get it from a phrase to an exclamation? How do I get it from an exclamation to just a B-roll shot? Yeah.
I mean, I can see why it took you 5 months to get this thing.
Right, because I'm learning this all as I'm going along, right? I don't know any of this going in. Yeah. But I think as a creator, on pretty much any type of video, you can do this. But like maybe not a podcast, but like pretty much anything else where you're telling a story, you're telling a journey, you can come in and not only work on your edit, but then go and reshoot stuff, right? Yeah. And go and reshoot 2 or 3 times. Like don't reshoot forever, right? I think there is like an analysis paralysis you can end up in.
Certainly.
But and start showing it to friends, right? That's the other thing I did. So Ian was like integral to this.
Too.
I'm literally screening it for friends, and I'm watching when they're getting bored, right? I'm watching when they start to look away.
You're doing the focus group.
Yeah, literally. Yeah. And I did that for a number of videos.
Wow.
Would sit down with people and I watch when they start to pick up their phone, or they start to look away, or they start asking me questions.
Never heard of this process before. I mean, this is interesting.
I mean, this was partly, I think, just coming out of like doing software. We do usability studies where we, you sit down in a coffee shop and
blending some interesting learnings from different ventures.
I didn't really know what I was doing, but I was like, well, I'll try.
No, it makes sense.
And it worked. And so, Yeah, I mean, I think that's my biggest advice is like I think Jimmy would say like over invest in your content, right? And the same thing goes for not just your video, but like everything else, right? Like your title. I come up with 50 to 100 titles for a video before I pick one. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I usually have it boiled down to like 5 by the time that I'm ready to release the video. And if one doesn't perform, I'll try and switch it to something else.
Okay.
And then we generally produce, I like to have at least 3 thumbnails that we've like fully produced 3 separate ideas for thumbnails. Each idea will probably have 4 or 5 different variations of like slight tweaks, but
well, and now with the benefit of A/B testing and all that stuff, like you don't necessarily have to hit it that hard. You can actually let the system kind of help let the cream rise to the top. But okay, so let's switch gears for a second and talk about like the maker mentality, because this is the other side, or the other common thread. Obviously, you exhibit a lot of this. You interact with a lot of what we would call, makers, and in the common threads of, I don't know, our ambitions, our desire to just make cool shit, whether it's content, whether it's product, and all this stuff. But then the things that we run into when we're actually trying to do this professionally a lot of the time is the fact that, what you were talking about earlier, we get bored when we try to do like make 10,000 of something versus one of something. Yeah. And it took you a little while, I think, to find your path in terms of what you were doing. It sounds to me like even entrepreneurially, you were, trying different things before you found something. And it's not to say that who knows what you'll be doing in the next 10 years, but you're in content creation now. Can you speak to that in terms of like your journey, and how do people find their way, and how do you get some focus, especially amongst a population that is not necessarily known to focus well, if that's fair?
Yeah, no, totally. And that 100% applies to me. I think a lot of, it's interesting. I have gotten feedback from the start, from that very first iPhone video, of people being sort of inspired by my persistence. And I've never seen myself as someone who is particularly good at finishing things. And it's really been a learned skill. Really something that I worked on hard kind of when I first started at Monsta was realizing that the fun part was the first 80%. And the last 20% was the part where you got paid. And that if I wanted to work for myself, I really had to put the effort into that last 20%, even if it was really painful. And so I got better at finishing things and just like forcing myself to finish things. It was not always pleasant. It's still not pleasant, right? Like it's not fun. I think the other piece to it, well, there's a couple other pieces. So the other one is that as soon as I started working on the second video, I felt the pressure from the audience of like, okay, what are you going to do next? When is the next video coming? And that...
What have you done for me lately?
Right, exactly. That pressure has been helpful in terms of... It's both been helpful and very stressful in terms of really forcing myself to like keep my eye on the ball and keep going. And whenever I lose that sense of urgency, I get into trouble. Like as soon as I feel like I can coast for a bit, then I get off the rails. So that's been helpful. And then I would say the third thing that's really interesting about making projects specifically targeted to tell a story on video is that I don't have to do a lot of the productionization effort I would do if I was making a product. Right. So, like when I'm making a crazy iPhone project, I just have to make one. And I don't want to lie in the sense that, I'm never like doing anything with fancy camera tricks or whatever. But I will say, like, at the same time, I don't have to worry about things like waterproofing, right? Like there are a bunch of things that, like, if you were going to sell an iPhone, you would spend man years on.
You're not subject to the same
that I just don't have to worry about, right?
Sure.
And so it's really nice in the sense that I have to just make something that tells a cool story and looks good on camera, right? And for me, that's the fun part. And all the stuff that would go into like waterproofing or packaging or like all of that stuff it's that last 20% that I don't have to do.
Yeah.
Right. So, for me, the last 20% is making sure that it visually looks good, right?
Yeah.
Like things like that. And then the last 20% of really like getting the edit perfect and things like that. So I have found that to be freeing in a lot of ways where, I don't feel like I have to grind through kind of the later stages of productionization and things like that.
I think this is really part of the reason I focus on talking to content creators a lot of the time is that one of the common messages that I've found is in terms of success in business a lot of times is that if you have an audience, you can sell a mediocre product, whatever it may be, whether it's an actual product or an idea or a class or a book or whatever it might be. And so we get into a lot of times people are like, I'll start a YouTube channel or whatever. In the efforts to support whatever it is that we're trying to get off the ground, our projects ideally are living and stuff like that. You obviously have the advantage of like it came fast and furiously, for you. But would you agree with the effort put in? I mean, in the great marketplace of ideas and things where everybody is just trying to shout above the noise, right? What do we do to allow ourselves to get comfortable with selling and marketing ourselves, because this journey is not for everyone, but if you do not sell, if you do not market, your business will die. It is the lifeblood. Having that money is the lifeblood of whatever you do.
That's a good question, and there are a couple different ways I could take that. I mean, I think what you're really driving at is like that comfort in asking people for money. Is that?
Yes, that's certainly part of it,
that.
Because I think a lot of makers there's a negative view of the sales side that feels smarmy or whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I've struggled with that over the years. I really had come into it thinking that Strange Parts was just going to be sort of a marketing channel for my own product. And I'm still not there, right? I'm 7 years in.
And that's interesting. So have you sold product per se? I mean, I feel like you've had little project ideas you've told me about in the past, but not really productizing anything.
No, I haven't. And part of it is really it's felt like I've constantly had to play catch up on the content side, on producing enough content.
Yeah.
I finally feel like I'm getting to the point where I understand how to do that reliably. And I'm hoping that 2024 is really the start of kind of the product era of Strange Parts. I have some interesting ideas that I want to productize. So really, like, up until now, most of the revenue for the channel has come from YouTube ads and then sponsorships, and then recently I started doing Patreon. I've done a few kind of merch level projects. Never really made a significant profit off of merch. Partly because I've always been dumb enough to do them as limited edition, like limited quantity.
You think that's dumb?
Really? Because the work into going and setting up a product, right? So the effort that goes into figuring out sourcing, manufacturing, packaging, setting up the sales website, like all of that stuff it's a fixed cost regardless of how many you sell. Yeah. And so if you're only going to sell 100, you now are amortizing that sunk cost across 100 rather than why limit it up front? Right? Like, why not do it as an ongoing product?
Well, because makers don't want to keep selling product. I mean, like that. Right. I think that's why we fall into the trap. I just laugh about this because I had Bob Claggett on and Jen Schechter 2 weeks ago, and Bob was saying, like, I like doing limited runs because it's like that defines a beginning and an end point. But I think that certainly feeds into that, like, and then I want to go into the next project.
Right, but the reality is that, like, doing your second production run of a product should be significantly not only easier, but cheaper.
Because you've had faster, all that learning and stuff. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, you've done 95% of the work. The actual making the thing is the easiest part. Sure. Right? Like, just turning the crank again should be relatively easy. And I'm sure with your products, right? Like, like all of the work setting up a new product is far more than producing more of an existing product. Right. So, the first product I did was it was for the headphone jack video, and it was these framed piece of artwork with sort of multimedia. It was this print of like a hand-drawn iPhone with some of the parts inside, and then the actual circuit board that I used for the headphone jack, sort of pasted into it. And I did them as a limited edition signed thing. And I can't remember whether we made 100 or 250. Regardless, it turns out that signing anything more than 100 times is like real work.
This is what we talk about with James. Like, you don't realize how much like 100 of something actually is until you actually make it, and you're like, it doesn't sound like a lot though, right? Yeah. And then you're like, oh my god, this
100 pieces of paper isn't a big deal.
Miserable.
But as soon as you've got 100, like as soon as you have to like unbox 100 picture frames and like composite, you've got matte board and you've got I hired like Junshu and 2 of his buddies, and like we were in my little studio apartment, and like just hours and hours and hours and hours of this. I guess it wasn't Junshu, it was Galen at that point. And like a couple of his buddies, and like I broke even on it, right?
Okay.
And then, I broke even, and then it turns out that shipping anything with glass in it is a terrible idea. Like,
you don't say.
A ton of them shattered, and that was a whole.
Yeah, and then you gotta make it right. Yeah.
Dumpster fire, and like, you gotta make it right. And
turns out packaging is harder than you think.
Yeah, you have to actually think about it.
And shipping things and international shipping of things. Yeah.
It just turns into this whole thing. And I did another limited edition, like when we did the wireless cell phone, which was upgrading, I think, an iPhone 7 to have wireless charging.
Okay, I was like, cell phones are all wireless.
Yeah, they weren't at the time.
Okay.
They weren't at the time.
No, wireless charging. Yes, I understand.
But we had done these really cool custom Strange Parts phone enclosures that had the Strange Parts logo, and they were gorgeous.
Yeah.
But there had to be separate tooling for every model of iPhone you wanted to do. So I was like, okay, I'm just doing iPhone 7. Okay. Which, like, there aren't that many people who have specifically an iPhone 7 who are ready to take it apart. And, like, so we made 100 of those, and, like, those took forever to sell.
Yeah.
And so it was like, part of this journey has been learning to be careful about what I commit to.
Yeah.
Particularly when it comes to making product.
Yeah.
And then I think the other piece is really, like, whatever I commit to, doing it on an ongoing basis, because I'm going to spend that upfront cost anyway. So I may as well have it as a recurring revenue stream rather than a one-time revenue stream.
Sure. So how much of business is learning what not to do?
All of it.
Most of it.
I don't know. Right. No, probably not all of it.
A
lot of it.
Yeah.
It's certainly like the most painful part of it.
Yeah.
Like I think learning what, like, finding things that work and coming with the new ideas is the fun and easy part.
Right.
Which is not to say it's trivial. It's, for me, the hard part really is everything that comes after that, which is, okay, how do I make this? I think sustainability is a really good word, right? And again, it doesn't come specifically back to money. Everybody talks about, like, making my YouTube channel sustainable as like a revenue problem. And I think of it much more, and maybe this just speaks to my strengths and weaknesses, I think of it far more as like an operational problem, right? And money plays a part of that, but it's never like the deciding factor, right? Because I can always make more money if I go out and make more videos, or if I can sell more sponsorships, or like, like I think once you are in a place where you have something that people want, regardless of the scale you're at, right? This was true for App Monster, and it's true for Strange Parts. Then it's a question of like, how do you make the trains run on time? How do you do sales? How do you produce product? How do you make sure, like all of that stuff becomes far more a bigger issue than, do we have something that people want?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, sustainability is a perfect topic for any business, and it's one that I don't think it gets looked at in the same way, right? Because you said it feels like money is the lifeblood. Like cash is like you need it to operate, you need it to survive, you need to pay your employees or buy your materials or whatever it might be.
But it's not sufficient in and of itself.
No, certainly not, and certainly not at the cost of your sanity and your, all that stuff. And so as you've evolved and started to realize, like, I mean, I could definitely optimize and make a ton of money, but if it means that I'm like married to the business in a way that I just don't want to be doing it anymore.
Yeah, and it's not even that, right? Like, it's not a matter of like, oh, I can just make a ton of money. At least for me, right? Like it's far more about like, okay, what what processes, what people, what systems do I need to have in place to go make that money, right? Like I have this zygote of a thing that people want. How do I do it more, better, more efficiently, more cost effective, like all of those things. And a lot of those problems aren't something that you can just throw money at, right?
Yes,
Like they're something that really require expertise and deep amounts of work. Right. And I think that's like a misnomer where, you know, I think a lot of people look at my early success and go, oh, like all his problems are solved. And it's like, it's never been my experience in business. Like the bigger the business gets, the bigger the problems get, right? Like the scarier the whole thing
Where have we
gets.
heard this before? More money, more problems. As they say.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah,
it's
exactly.
It's like he knew what he was talking about. So right now we're in Frankfurt, Germany, at a trade show called FormNext. It happens to be like one of the largest additive conferences and stuff like that. And watching you operate, you know, walking through here. Now, I haven't had the luxury of obviously joining you on the streets of Shenzhen or in the markets or anything like that. But I can clearly see how skilled you are in the art of conversation. I mean, even, you know, obviously from this, but but just in your interactions with people, in the deep knowledge that you draw from, and that you know, it was just really interesting. I bet you could walk just about any trade show and find really fascinating people and things to talk about.
I've been to some really boring trade shows, but I'd like to think so.
I'm sure you have, but I mean, you'll clearly like, okay, I've gotten what I need out of this conversation. Then you go to the next thing. I mean, like this, there were, you know, many booths to go to and whatnot. Is that a skill that you've just inherently had, or you've had to hone through the years, the art of just the
It's interesting that you say this, because I wouldn't consider myself a great conversationalist.
You're selling yourself short. You're a fantastic conversationalist.
I mean, it's definitely something I feel insecure about, and I would say particularly in like networking type situations, I'm very uncomfortable. Like if we had gone to a cocktail party instead of a trade show floor, very different for me.
Really?
Part of what's easy about this is like, one, there's like a relatively set interaction, right? Like we know that they're at a booth. I'm approaching the booth. They want to tell me about their thing. I want to learn about their thing, and their thing is there, so I can pick it up and talk about it and ask questions.
Yeah.
So that makes it easier.
Worst case, you could run away from the booth, and they pretty much have to stay
exactly.
there. yeah, that's what you're getting at. I love that. Okay, go ahead.
But I think like one thing that I've really had to work on is sort of just having the guts to like go out and talk to people.
That is so surprising to hear.
Believe it or not, like I'm a hardcore introvert. I like events like this wipe me out. Like just exhaust me.
Okay.
I could not be doing this on the regular.
Yeah.
And I do go to a number of events throughout the year, but I'm like usually destroyed by the end of it. And I think in particular, like I've had to work on sort of the courage to go out and like just walk up to people and start asking questions and things like that. I'm far, like even here, like I'll sneak up on a booth and be like peering at stuff without, you know, quite catching the attention of the sales guy on purpose, because I want to kind of check it out and get a lay of the land before I'm like,
if I want to actually engage.
Defending my presence, kind of thing.
That's interesting.
But also like in the markets of Shenzhen, right? Like going out, like there were, I can remember countless times of like sitting in my apartment or sitting in a hotel room, like trying to psych myself up to go out and shoot and go out and walk the markets, because it's like it's really uncomfortable to like walk in. You're definitely a foreigner. You're definitely an outsider. You stand out like crazy, and I'm not necessarily walking into the markets like I'm not necessarily there for the reason they want me to be there. If that makes sense, right? Like, I don't run a cell phone repair business in the U.S., right? I'm not there to buy 100,000 of something.
Yeah.
So I think sort of having, like, building up the courage and building up the sense of, like, no, I belong here, and it's okay to, like, take up space and take up people's time and things like that has been a real learned thing.
That's really interesting to hear, and I'm happy that you share this with people, because I think it's a common conversation I've had with other creators as well, that we watch these people in their environment online, and that it is a very different flexed muscle to be editing and being in front of a camera and talking to the camera and presenting things and ideas and telling stories in that way where you have an editorial process versus going to the cocktail party and all this stuff. And I think we've all had, see, I'm the opposite of you. I'm a highly extroverted individual. And to be clear too, like I think there's a common misconception too that like, if you're an introvert, it doesn't mean that you can't go up and talk to people. It means you don't derive energy from it in the same way. So I get really amped up when I go to these shows, and I just get like all the creative juices are flowing, and I get just really energized and all that stuff. And yes, I will come down, but then I'll get home, and then I just get like, honestly, I get depressed. I'm not around my people, and I need to be. So right now, you know, all this travel has actually suited me well. Everybody's like, you're crazy, and I'm like, no, I love this stuff. But there's definitely times where, you know, to go back to the creating content, I am not a content creator. However, I've seen very clear value.
He says on his podcast.
When I put... pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I'm not a YouTuber in the way that a lot of the people that I interact with are. And, but I have seen a lot of value in creating, content or marketing material and what that does for our sales. Right. And I have the moments that you do as well, where it's just like, I am not in the mood to just be on for this right now, and it just doesn't work if I'm like, I'm just not presenting in a way. So I think this is a common thread for everybody. So it's good for people to hear that this is normal, even for top tier YouTubers and all that stuff. So how do you get yourself amped up, or is it just you're just like, it's okay, and we're gonna record tomorrow, or whatever it is?
I mean, sometimes it's that. Sometimes it's, you know, listening to music and like kind of getting the juices flowing that way, you know, like I've got a morning routine I'll go through, and like part of it is committing to every morning, like, you know, taking a shower, getting dressed, doing my hair, doing all of the things that make me 100% presentable to be on camera, so that I have zero excuse from that angle, right? Like, so I always wear the same T-shirt.
I do the same thing.
Whenever I'm on camera. I own tons of these shirts.
Just black T-shirt. It's like the Steve Jobs thing. It's not the turtleneck, but you're right.
Yeah, these are like a dark blue. They're actually
you are dark blue.
They're an icebreaker, so they're a wool shirt. And I started wearing these
for those
when
listening,
I travel.
He's describing his outfit.
They look like a T-shirt, but they're made out of wool, or they're partially wool.
Okay.
And I wear them because they're antimicrobial. So I can wear the same T-shirt for multiple days in a row without it smelling. And you can hand wash them.
Okay.
And they dry pretty quick.
Okay.
And so when I'm traveling, particularly in China, for some reason in China, particularly a lot of the places I've been, like laundry machines are unobtainium.
What?
And so I end up having to hand wash everything.
They hand wash all their clothes?
I don't
like
know.
What? Like in the sink?
No.
Like how does that work?
People have small washing machines in their apartments that are really cheap.
Yeah.
But as a traveler, you just can't get access to a washing machine. So I end up like washing stuff in the shower. And so it's just been this travel hack that I learned. I wish I knew the guy that I learned it from. But anyway, from a nomad who has a blog who does a gear review every year of like what he's traveling with.
This is fascinating.
And so typically I travel with like 3 to 4 of these, and they work really well. Unfortunately, they're really expensive. But
see, I thought you were going to go with like continuity. Like you're like,
well, that's,
this, okay.
That's why.
Okay.
Yeah. So I was traveling with these before I started shooting.
Yeah.
And you can get them in different colors and stuff, but I've settled on this one exact T-shirt.
He's a Navy man.
And I always wear the same exact thing because I tend to do projects that I shoot over long periods of time, and I like to reshoot, particularly intros and conclusions and connector bits and stuff.
Yeah.
I like to never have to worry about what's going to go with what.
About the continuity.
Right? And like having to go find the right T-shirt to go like reshoot something, right? Like it's hard enough with, you know, your background and the daylight and like all of that stuff. Then like, so yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of like getting sort of physically, I feel like there's something to a ritual of like getting physically ready to shoot. Will help you get mentally ready to shoot. So I think that's part of it. I think part of it is giving yourself the ability to say, you know what, I'm not feeling it today, right? And I would specifically go to like when you're a full-time content creator, sometimes you have bad days, right? Like sometimes there's other stuff going on in your life. You know, you've just had a breakup, or you had a family member pass away, or you've just had a fight with your significant other, or like whatever it is, right? And if that, like, I try and be as genuine as possible as I can in my content, but sometimes that can't be part of the story.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Like often that can't be part of the story for those types of things.
Yeah.
Or the thing that I need to shoot today is me being super jazzed up about something. And that's not how I'm feeling. And sometimes it's just to like grin and bear it and suck it up and act it, you know? And like, it doesn't matter how you're feeling. That's part of your job is to to be who you need to be on camera. And like, I play myself on camera. Like, I don't play another character.
Yeah.
But the character that I play on camera, even though he's called Scotty as well, it's Strange Parts Scotty. Yeah. And Strange Parts Scotty is not all of off-camera Scotty, right?
Do you find that when you interact with people in real life that they, have an expectation of what Strange Parts Scotty is, and then are you... I don't know.
They're pretty close.
It seems like it's pretty close. But the guy behind the guy is not necessarily the same guy, is what you're saying.
Like day to day, like, like real life Scotty gets depressed sometimes. Like on camera Scotty, like...
Real life Scotty's sad today.
Right. Yeah. Like sometimes he has bad days. Sometimes he's really grumpy. I'm rarely grumpy on camera, right? Like... I sometimes am
I would love to see how that
like,
plays.
You know, I'm rarely like
Scotty
angry on camera, right? I don't tend to yell at people on Strange Parts.
I would watch that video though. I would like
you know,
Scotty
there definitely been moments on camera where I've been like depressed because the project is going terribly, kind of thing, right? So sometimes it fits in the story. I would say the other piece when we talk about people who are reluctant to be on camera is to realize that being on camera is a learned skill.
Yes.
And it is a skill that I am convinced, because I have been through the process, that anybody can learn.
Yeah.
It is not the case that I was born with the innate ability to be on camera. Not true. And I actually give a talk called Storytelling for Hackers that talks about some of this. And one of the things that I do in that talk is I show one of the very first takes of me talking to camera for that first iPhone story. And it is me incredibly uncomfortable and can barely get out a sentence.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And I'm doing it, I'm doing kind of starting over and kind of thing. And I kind of, I purposely don't edit it down so that the audience can kind of feel the awkwardness and the like uncomfortableness.
Yeah.
And basically to say, like, when I started, I was incredibly uncomfortable on camera, and like most people, did not like the sound of my voice, right?
No.
And I bet you have probably experienced this as well. When you spend enough time listening to your own voice during editing, and watching yourself, if you've done a lot of video, that goes away, or it did for me.
Yeah, I tolerate it. I still don't like the sound of my voice. I feel like I sound nasally, but we're all so critical of that. It's weird. Yeah, but you're right. I think you do get numb to it. Sure.
I at least got to the point where my voice sounds like my voice. Like I no longer have a separation between the voice that I hear through my ears when I speak and the voice that I hear when I play myself back recorded. Yeah. Like those feel like and when I look at myself, like those feel like the same person. And it's actually been this really interesting personal growth element, which is that it helped me be a lot more comfortable with who I am. Like I have found...
That's really a great nugget. I want to stay with that for just a second.
No, and I'm going to go one step further.
Do it. Yeah.
So I have found that when I am editing, particularly if I'm like really digging into an edit, I develop a lot of empathy for the people that I'm editing, right? Like I rarely edit something with like an antagonistic approach to the people that I'm editing. If I worked on different content, maybe I'd feel differently. But by the time I'm done with an edit, if I'm doing the edit soup to nuts, and I mostly don't edit my own stuff now. Like I have editors and I work with them, but I'm not the guy in the trenches. You're not the guy. Yeah. Okay. If I'm the guy in the trenches, I will come out with this like kind of deep love for everybody that I've edited in an episode, which is really interesting. Like even people that like I've had conflict with or whatever, like I've just spent so much time trying to tell their story as part of whatever it is that like it develops this like empathy and love. And I found that same empathy and love comes out towards myself as well. even when I'm showing myself screw up or things like that, like I found this like, I don't know, there's sort of like peace. Yeah, I keep coming back to like peace and empathy and love towards whoever the subject is, even if it's myself. And that's been transformative for me as a person. Like
What a great
big
practice.
inflection point.
I don't think we think about the value of presenting in front of the camera for self-improvement in that way,
Yeah.
but that's a really fascinating and great point. Thank you. Yeah.
And I think I've been lucky that the things that I was bullied really heavily as a kid in school. And I think, and the things that I was bullied for are the things that I'm now celebrated for. So it's been particularly transformative for me of like the things, the reason that I am well known now in the communities that I'm well known in are things that I was once attacked for. And so that, like, that helps.
Fantastic. Well, Scotty, I want to thank you for sharing so much of yourself, obviously, with this and your time. I mean, we could go on for days. I always love having conversations with you and stuff, and maybe we'll have to have you back at some point to hear more about, you know, what the next chapter brings. Because, like you mentioned, you're kind of an interesting transition time now as you move forward. But I have every faith in you, your abilities, and just knowing from, you know, the storied history you've built on top of it. Whatever you end up doing is just going to be, you know, fantastic.
Well,
and I can't wait to see it.
Thank you. This has been a pleasure.
If you're listening here, if you're not familiar, please do go seek out the channel. It is fantastic content. It's called Strange Parts on YouTube. You can also check out strangeparts.com, I believe.
Yep.
For more interesting ideas and photos and videos and maybe even some product ideas in the future.
Yes. Yeah. It's exciting stuff on the way.
Oh, fantastic. Scotty, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Take care.